Hello and welcome to another revision video for the GCSE English language exams coming up in June. This particular video is going to focus all on about knowing your author and knowing your characters, and again making sure you analyse and not summarise. And that's one of the key things that I keep telling my students, and it's a pitfall that D grade, C grade students fall into, unfortunately. Now, much of what I'm going to be talking about today and some of the little hints and tips and ideas that I'm going to give you to help improve your grade are transferable across the language and literature papers, Mice and Men, Kill a Mockingbird, even the poetry. So you should be able to transfer those same skills across all papers, so I really think this will be useful. We're going to focus on four main things today. The first thing is knowing your author's style. Now I'm going to specifically focus on Steinbeck to give an example, but again you could use Harper Lee or a particular poet or Shakespeare or whatever it is you have your exam on. There's something I'm going to talk about which I refer to with my students as the two adjective rule. It's a really simple and effective way of opening up your essay and can really show the examiner you've got a great grasp of what you're talking about. The third thing I'm going to look at, which is a problem I see in many of my students' work, is overusing the word show when they're trying to analyse what the author's trying to do. So I'm going to give you some advice and some guidance and some examples of how to improve on that. And the last thing we're going to look at today is knowing your characters inside out and being able to show off very quickly and efficiently just how much you know about your characters during your exam. Right, let's start with the author's style. You need to show the examiner that you know your author, and if you can't or don't, then you need to make it look like you know your author. And you're going to need to try and look at the patterns in terms of the language that they use and really just have a good grasp of the kind of stylistic features that are quite common within their work. Now, Steinbeck, one of the things that is most common in his work is, of course, at the start of every section, he begins with a really vivid description of the setting. Now, there's all sorts of things within that you should know from your own lessons and your reading of the text, where the setting kind of captures the mood and the tone and the elements of nature or metaphorical of different elements and parts of the story. But again, if a setting question comes up or a setting extract, you could just make reference to the fact that he commonly uses these settings to kind of set the tone at the beginning of each section. And of course, it's important to point out as well that generally everything that happens in that section happens within that setting that's been introduced at the start. It never goes outside of that. Now, adverbs are one of the features that Steinbeck uses most commonly. They're generally used at the end of dialogue or before someone says something, and it really gives the reader a sense of the tone or the way they feel, and it's used always between George and Lenny, and you can really get a sense of how they're feeling or the tone in which they deliver what they're saying. And again, for the foundation paper with GCSE English Language, where you have to pick out those three features and you get 1 mark for each, you can guarantee that there's going to be an adverb in there. They usually end in a Y, and it's just a matter of finding it. And this kind of, all of these ideas that we're revising here, the style, that should really help you with that 3-mark question. And number 3, in terms of Steinbeck's style, is dialect. He uses an awful lot of it, uses an awful lot of accent as well, and it gives a really strong impression of the characters, of the way the men talk, the kind of macho, masculine, aggressive atmosphere of the time. How there's a lack of family, there's a lack of kind of female presence, and you can see even that idea to she slang her pups as an example really kind of sets the tone. But what does it allow the reader to do? Well, it gives us a sense of how people spoke of that time. It's a historical document, that we can kind of read into and get a feel for how the men spoke and the type of terms they use and things like that. And again, compared to nowadays, it's very un-PC, and they just kind of say what they really feel, and they're not too worried about hurting or offending anyone's feelings. Dialogue is a huge one again for Steinbeck. The text was very successfully adapted for play by himself, and one of the reasons for that is it's so kind of embedded within conversations, and conversations are such a big element of it. Now, why is that a significant feature of Steinbeck's writing? Well, it allows us to almost earwig to kind of almost like listen in onto the men and how they spoke again, and exactly feel what they were feel like we're there listening into these conversations that should be private in some cases, and we really get to kind of make our own judgment rather than just the author saying he said this or she said that and she spoke like that. He really kind of gives us the permission, a kind of a VIP pass almost into the barn and into the ranch, so that we can kind of almost feel like we were there as it happened, which of course he was himself. The presentation of women is a key feature in terms of style again, and how they're presented. Of course, Curly's wife doesn't even have a name, and generally the overall idea is that men seem to think of women, they're either mothers or whores, and there's so much given in the book to kind of describing different kind of parlours or prostitute houses, and again that's a huge element of his writing, and again it's reinforcing the absence of kind of mother nature or the kind of family, and really kind of reinforcing, juxtaposing the idea of the absence of family with the kind of harshness of the environment and the presence of such kind of a masculine atmosphere. Steinbeck doesn't use a lot of colour in his writing, but he does emphasise the colour red. And if you keep that in mind as you're reading, you may just come across it in the extract that you're looking at, or the extract that you pick for the second part of the question. Again, it's kind of used to symbolise danger or a warning, which of course George sees, but Lenny doesn't seem to pass any heed of. And so the rouged lips and the kind of red shoes all kind of paint that idea of a kind of a warning sign. One thing that I really like is Steinbeck's use of names, and it really says an awful lot more about the character, and particularly about places. Obviously, Lenny being Lenny Small, the word Lenny itself is quite a childlike word compared with George. If you contrast those two, George is a much more serious kind of name. Crooks, obviously, because of his crooked back, and then you've got Curly with his kind of curly hair, like he's kind of a tightened coil ready to kind of spring and kind of ready to attack, which of course he is like. But more importantly, the place name Soledad is actually a Spanish word meaning solitary, meaning kind of alone and isolation, and it really fits in with the whole atmosphere of the ranch. And then of course Weed, which is the place where George and Lenny escape from. Again, that idea of a weed is something that drains life, that takes, that I suppose is hideous to look at and not very attractive, and really feeds into that idea of them trying to escape from this thing that was kind of sucking the life out of them. And it's a really clever feature of Steinbeck's writing, his use of names. He really thinks carefully about them and sees how, and thinks about how the name can actually lend itself to the ideas and themes that he's trying to communicate to his reader. And lastly, in terms of Steinbeck's style, are his constant references to nature. There's lots of animal imagery, comparing and contrasting the men, particularly Lenny, with a bear and things like that. Curly is compared to a terrier. But again, going back to the original point about the setting descriptions, you really get a kind of a strong sense of the kind of, even in the after Curly's wife dies, the description of the setting with the horses being unsettled, the dog and the shooting of the dog, which foreshadows the death of Lenny, as well as George pulls the trigger on the back of his neck. All of the nature is kind of used to symbolise what is to come, as if nature knows and men can't see it, and men continue to make the same mistakes over and over again and not learning from it, whereas nature generally seems to kind of learn from that, and there's a kind of a hidden kind of meaning in behind all of the kind of descriptions of the setting. Right, number 2, the 2 adjective rule. Very simple, very effective, can work really well. That's something I've always taught my students. They use it and it looks great in the writing, and again, the more they practice, it really kind of shows a really solid understanding of the text, and again, it's straight into analysis, and all of these tips will really help you to avoid summary, which is something you're taught for far too long in class. So I hope this will work, but the 2 adjective rule is something we'll look at now. Now you can see there a perfect example right in front of you. Instead of just starting off with John Steinbeck is an author who, or John Steinbeck cleverly writes blah blah blah, you start off with 2 adjectives. You put them at the start of the sentence. So insightful and hard-hitting, comma, John Steinbeck is an author who blah blah blah. And again, it's giving you a nice variety in terms of your sentence structure, but straight away you're being efficient, you're getting to the point, and you're analysing. Those words, insightful and hard-hitting, are not written in any text. Okay, there are your ideas, and they're the kind of things you're going to get marks for. Another way of looking at it, tragic and emotional, Steinbeck's characters or themes are always, and again, you can use those exact ones if you want, or again, pick ones on the day that suit the kind of question that comes up. Again, this can be used for poetry, it can be used for George Orwell or Harper Lee, whatever it is. But it's just a matter of you flicking through the book, deciding on a couple of adjectives that you feel kind of capture the author's essence, and using them every single time. Your opening line of your paragraph, the start of your essay, or maybe in the opening line of your conclusion, but they really stand out and they're really impressive. So there's a few examples there, and there's a few here coming up, and specifically you can use it to describe a character. So if you get your extract question is based on a character, or even in your literature paper when you're asked about a specific character, again, start off with 2 adjectives. Lonely and bitter. Crooks is a character who represents blah blah blah. Childish and self-destructive. Lenny is a character who represents blah blah blah. Dangerous and lonely. Carnley's wife is blah blah blah. There's so many different ways of doing it, and there's something similar which I'm going to show you at the end about really knowing your character. But it's really nice, it's really efficient, it gets to the point really quickly, and you can answer the question in the first 2 words, and then after that it's just a matter of providing evidence and exploring some of the language, but it shows that you know what you're talking about. Okay, we're getting there. Number 3. This is something that I see my students do far too often. It doesn't look good, it gets monotonous and boring and repetitive, and it's in doing good analysis they keep using the word show. So for example, Steinbeck cleverly uses sibilants to show. Steinbeck brilliantly uses a metaphor to show. So what I want to try and do is show you, pardon the incorrect use of the word again, is to different ways of maybe doing the same sentence but making the right point, but without kind of looking like it's a kind of a really kind of learned, structured kind of ABC paint by numbers response. So instead of show, what can we do? Well, you can see here a load of examples that are about to come up where instead of saying show, you can use words such as highlight. The author cleverly uses an adjective to highlight blah blah blah, Lenny's feelings of blah blah blah. Steinbeck subtly uses sibilants to create an effect of blah blah, or to suggest something. Harper Lee vividly uses metaphors to paint an image. Now I really like that one because 3 things there are really connected together. The vividly shows an understanding of what metaphors do, and again, even the phrase paint an image, that's exactly what metaphors do. So there you've got a student who knows bang on exactly what they're talking about. He's talking about the author, talking about language, talking about the reader, the 3 core elements of being a successful student in this exam, but is showing a really good understanding of what vividly means and metaphors and the effect that they're designed to have on the reader. The same with the next one. The poet uses onomatopoeia to allow the reader to hear. Again, just very subtly, you're showing your understanding of the impact and effect of onomatopoeia and why Steinbeck or Harper Lee or Orwell would have used it in their paragraph or in their chapter. Now there's so many you can use. There's a whole load. You can pause that and have a look at them, jot them down in your notes or your book or revision book or whatever. But again, there's some that are very general and some that are much more specific and can really link in beautifully with a particular language device that you're talking about or a point. Now, you're ultimately going at some point, whether it's language or lit, going to be writing about character. And not only is this a good technique and tip to improve your analytical skills, it's a really good way of revising each character and thinking about the way they're presented. And again, it's about tracking the patterns and thinking about the style. So instead of saying Lenny is presented, Lenny is seen, you can say, first of all, you can start off with initially start off with Lenny is presented as, but then use little quotes that you've already learned and prepared in advance. And again, you could use 2 or 3 of these for each character, but you could say the big baby Lenny is seen to be blah blah blah, or the reader realizes that the crazy bastard is like a, and again, they're quotes that you can embed in your sentence that are from the text. And you can use them if and when you get. Now I've done a grid which you can see in front of you that has got most of the main characters on the left hand side and 4 or 5 different quotes that could be put in front of their name or instead of their name. And again, it's just a nice way of showing variety, of your understanding of the character, and it'll really stand out. And if you're talking about wanting to get A's and A stars, this is the kind of thing where you can very quickly show a really kind of deep and detailed understanding of the character without going, getting too sidetracked off the question, and really make an impression